Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Andrew Townsend. I'm with eLearning Brothers. Today's session is going to be about learning experience design versus instructional design. This session will be recorded. We'll get a copy of it posted on our blog and on our YouTube page later in the week. So you can watch that or expect that to come to your email later in the week. If you have questions during the webinar or we'll be asking for comments and things, please use the questions panel. You'll find that in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. If we aren't able to get to all of them, we will try to answer some of those offline as we can. All right, so to talk to us today, we have Dr. Marty Rosenheck, our Director of Talent Development and Consulting with us today. Thanks, Dr. Rosenheck, for joining us. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Andrew, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm excited to kind of share with you some thinking about this, about learning experience design versus instructional design. And this is a hot topic and it's a shifting topic, and so I'm excited to get a chance to have a conversation with you. And as Andrew mentioned, I'm going to be presenting a bunch of stuff, but also I want to get your thoughts and questions as well, and make it as much in this format as we can into a conversation. Okay, so first of all, let's start this off with a question. And the question is this: Andrew, if you can put up the question screen, there's a poll basically saying, what does your job title contain? And there doesn't have to be the exact job title, but does it contain or related to instructional design? Is it learning experience design? Or is it other? So pick one of those three, and then we'll see how it all pans out. And then also, if it's other, if we don't mind just putting into the chat box area what it is, what your actual title is, and we can see kind of what are we calling ourselves these days? What's the industry calling ourselves?
There's quite a few others coming in now: technical training specialist, learning partner, e-learning content developer, senior training specialist, learning specialist, e-learning author, LMS coordinator, information development manager, coordinator of training and education, e-learning specialist, project development trainer, manager of L&D, educational resource developer, business ops communication specialist, L&D specialist, an advisor of technical training, professional development manager, lots of those. I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll and show those results here. Yeah. So as you can see here, there's 53%, more than half of our audience has instructional design in their title, 9% has learning experience design, and then 38% have other titles, as I was reading earlier.
Okay, great, very, very interesting. So that's kind of interesting statistic right there, and it's and we're going to get talk more about what it is and what the difference is and what the titles are versus our roles. But I want to just show you, I did a little informal research, and I think what you shared is pretty similar actually. So what I did was I just did an informal survey on LinkedIn. So I basically went on LinkedIn, searched for people with the keyword of instructional design, and then in the title, and learning experience design in the title. And it's informal because the way it works apparently looks like it only got my first, second, and third level contacts, which is a lot. But notice that it's almost the same proportions as we have here. Isn't that interesting? Actually, well, 80%, 88% of between the two, I didn't ask for other things, right? Were involved instructional design, and only 12% involved learning experience design. So that's the percentage of the learning experience design people is about consistent with what we have here. So that's interesting. So as you can see, it's only a small group of people are really thinking of themselves that way or calling themselves that. And we want to see, well, what is the difference in what's going on? Because I think there's some changes going on in the workplace and in our industry, and a shift going on. For example, I want to share with you that probably looking into this a few years ago, there were very, very few, just a couple of people. And so I want to give you a quick historical perspective, also share a little bit of my background so that you can know where I'm coming from, and then I'm going to dive into this even more, okay? So were there any questions or comments that come up with these statistics at this point? Anything that anybody's got in terms of questions related to these?
No.
Okay. So and just put them in if you got them. All right. So I want to show you something. I went back and looked back at kind of the history of this for me, from my perspective. And so I remember I did a talk at Online Learning Conference in 2014, and this is a tweet that a friend of mine, Will Talamer, who is one of the great translators of cognitive science and research into learning. Some of you know of him. But anyway, he was there apparently and sent this tweet because I was giving this presentation and I was talking and actually showing this diagram, which actually, by the way, I'm going to share with you a later version of this soon. But as I was talking about it, I said, look, learning is a series of experiences. And so I really have just decided to change what I call myself from instructional designer to a learning experience designer. And this was in 2014. And the following year, 2015, I did a presentation called Becoming a Learning Experience Designer at DevLearn. And been doing that for quite a while. At the same time, just from a historical perspective, instructional design, I'd say the earliest we found of the term was about actually 2007. A guy named Niels Floor, I'm sorry, what's his name? Yeah, Niels Floor had used that term, and very, very early on. And I know that in 2015, Connie Malamed, who's also a great blogger and translator of research into how to practical learning methods, Connie wrote an article I remember in 2015 saying, hey, we need to start shifting to a learning experience designer. And so it started kind of becoming a thing over time, but even then there were very few people. And so shifting that way. And my belief is that there's going to be a shift in what we call ourselves and how we think of ourselves, and it's a very timely shift and something that needs to happen. Just really briefly, my background and how I got to this point is I've been involved in the learning business, in a sense, for many, many years. I started out in psychology and studied, undergraduate psychology, but it's behavioral psychology. Learned a lot about rats, but not much about humans. But I got really interested in it. I ended up working after that for a family business. My uncle started a company that made adaptive learning software, training software for the Apple II computer for SAT preparation. Apple II computers in 1982. And it was adaptive learning on 16K of RAM, not 16 megabytes, 16K of RAM. Pretty amazing. And I ended up working with him, and it was a family business, and got interested in that whole field. Started out in sales, but got interested in the learning part of it. Ended up going and doing my master's. I'm from New York, so at Columbia University Teachers College, and they had a new program that had just come out, it was 1984, that was called Communication, Computing, and Technology in Education. It was a mouthful, but it was about educational software development, basically. And worked in the field for many years and ended up realizing, okay, to do this well, I got to really understand how people learn at a deeper level. And so I ended up coming to Madison, Wisconsin to do my doctorate in cognitive science applied to education. And that's where I really studied expertise and how people develop expertise and the differences between experts and novices. And that really shaped the rest of my work and the rest of my life in consulting in this field ever since. And the key thing, the key thing about experts is a lot of research on this and how people develop expertise, but mainly it's through experience, through practice and doing. And that's a core focus that I've had throughout my work. And so that infuses what we're going to do. So let's kind of take a look now at what is instructional design and what is learning experience design, and get a sense of that. And we're going to contrast them, and then kind of get a little more into what learning experience design looks like and how we start moving in that direction. Okay. So here's a nice quote from someone named Jay Cross, who's a colleague of mine who passed away a few years ago, but he was basically, he's credited often with coining the term informal learning. And I love this quote of his. Learning is something people do. Training, and I put in parentheses instruction, is something you do to people. To me, that's a good way to distinguish the two. Learning is something people do. Training is something you do to people. And so one way I like to think about this
Hey, Marty, it looks like your email is still over the top of your presentation.
Oh, my email? I'm sorry. So it's not changing?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, sorry.
There we go, looks great.
All right, thank you. So those are some of those, that was just some of the history piece. There's the quote. Sorry, you guys couldn't see it, but there it is. Learning is something people do. Training is something you do to people. That was from Jay Cross. And then this is what the next piece I was on is saying, look, the way that, think about this in terms of learning. Have any of you heard of 70-20-10 idea framework? 70-20-10, raise your hands if you've heard of it. Okay.
Looks like about 20% of our audience has heard of it.
Okay, so basically this is an idea that I would consider general guidelines that basically the way people develop skills or get to proficiency is only about 10% through formal training, and then the rest of it is either informal coaching, social, and 70% is through on the job or experience by actually doing the job. So what happens is even when you do formal training, after a lot of the real learning happens on the job afterwards. Okay, and these numbers are not exact; they come from different places. But the guidelines in general, those proportions, general work, and they align with what I know in terms of research and cognitive science, that people develop skills primarily through doing, and a small part of it is formal instruction. Okay, so if we accept that, then we realize that really instructional design is focused on formal instructions. How do you design, classroom, e-learning, formal instructional events, which is a big part of how we focus our energies in our field quite a bit. Okay, and then we know that a lot of the learning happens afterwards. Well, learning experience design really is focused on the entire process of learning. Okay, the formal, the informal, and on the job. Okay, the experiential, because with the word experience in it, that's a key piece of it. So that's one of the key differences. I think that learning experience design subsumes instructional design. It's one part of it, but it's not all of it. And the focus on formal instruction is not broad enough for what we need to do and how we know people learn. So instruction it's only a small part of learning. Okay. So we got to look at and focus on, like I like to say, it's the whole enchilada, not just part of it. So here's I looked at some definitions of instructional design. There are different ones and they vary, but here's one that came from Wikipedia that had some decent sources, Merrill and others. So instructional design is the practice of systematically designing and developing and delivering instructional products and experiences, both digital and physical, in a consistent and reliable fashion toward an efficient, effective, appealing, engaging, and inspiring acquisition of knowledge. Okay, and I bolded two things here. One is instructional, so it's about that instruction, which is, of course, it's instructional design, but that formal learning. And secondly, it's about acquisition of knowledge, okay, which is different than, for example, the idea of the ability to do something with that knowledge. And in instructional design, and by the way, of course, I called myself an instructional designer and considered myself that until 2014. So I'm not putting down instructional design. I think it was a great way to think about things, and it was, but it was a little too narrow of a focus. And really, we're talking about more than instruction. We're talking about learning and how do you set up a way for people to learn. Let's take a look at that word instruction. What does that mean? I'm thinking, okay, well, what does instruction mean? So here's a definition of instruction. There are different ones, but this one was a pretty clear one. Instruction is the transfer of learning from one person to another. Anytime you're given directions or told how to do something, you are receiving instruction. Okay, so think about that. And the noun, it comes from the noun instruction. It's related to the word structure. Okay, and we're structuring a learning environment, structuring a classroom environment. We're kind of directing how things should go in a very kind of pretty well defined way. Especially e-learning, we tend to be very, very specific in how to do that. Okay, and so we're kind of, in a sense, you can think of it doing it to people, as Jay Cross would say, as opposed to creating the opportunity for them to learn. Okay, it's creating the conditions for learning. So here's a definition. There are a lot of definitions of learning experience design popping up. This is one that I've developed that is still draft, and I'm very actually open to people's comments on this and suggestions, and you can feel free to put them in the comments or afterwards as well. And by the way, I'll send you a link to this at some point. Actually, maybe I can put this in here. I started a conversation about this yesterday on LinkedIn, and I'm going to put in, if I can put it in here, I'm just going to put the link to that, and you'll have that just while I'm thinking about it, because I'd love to continue this conversation with people and beyond what's in this webinar. So let me put this into the chat. Chat. If I can figure out, oh, there it is. To all people. So this is a link to, there, it's in the chat thing. It's a link to the, don't need to go there now, but it's basically a link to a conversation that I started on this, and please feel free to continue the conversation there. Okay, so here's the definition. Tell me what you think, and you know, I'm open to suggestions on it, but this is, to me, what's working well. So it's the learner-centered process of facilitating the learning and application of knowledge and skills, expertise, proficiency, by providing a set of learning activities, formal, informal, and experiential, supported by content, feedback, and technology. When I do a learning experience design, that's kind of how I think of what I do. Learner-centered is a key part of that. Facilitating the learning, not directing it, but facilitating, creating the conditions for the learning, okay? Designing ways to do that. And providing focus on application of knowledge and skills, and providing a set of learning activities, okay, that include the formal, informal, but especially the experiential, as all part of that entire process of learning, supported by the content, feedback, and technology. So that's how I'm thinking about it. Open to suggestions or questions on that. Again, in the conversation, would love to have more feedback on that as well. Is there anything, Andrew, does anybody have any comments or questions at this point about the definition?
Not necessarily about the definition. There's a question here. Is the instructional designer doing this for training to facilitate, or are instructional designers doing the design, development, delivery to the learners themselves?
Are they doing it to the, can you read the first part again? Are they doing it to the?
Sure. So are instructional designers building training to facilitate training elsewhere? Or are they building it to present it themselves? Typically.
It can go either way, I'd say, but pretty often, and I see instructional designers building the training, whether it's e-learning or a workshop or something that can be presented by someone else. It could be presented by that person as well. It could go either way. I think who's presenting it or how it's being delivered is not directly tied to whether to the process of the instructional design.
Another question came in, which of these includes coaching?
Well, I would argue that coaching is included in learning experience design because that's part of that process, and actually that question leads into a good segue for kind of, I'm going to go into a little more detail about how I think about learning experience design. So I'm going to go on from there, and that's a good question. So first of all, kind of a quick kind of comparison here. So instructional design, which has been really good, it's kind of like the difference between, you know, Newtonian physics has been really effective. It's just not effective in all, it doesn't count for everything. So Einsteinian physics, it counts for Newtonian physics and everything else too. It's the same thing like instructional design. Instructional design is good, it's really worked well, but it's not inclusive enough, and we need to go beyond it, is how I look at it. Its focus is on instruction. It's content centric, and it doesn't have to be this way, but most of what I see, a lot of the focus, and a lot of people, when they're doing instructional design, think of it as developing content for, you know, for the learners, right? I mean, that's a big piece of it, and I see that a lot. And the content is important. It's primarily focused on the formal part of learning, although people calling themselves instructional designers are starting to expand beyond that too. So I'm not saying that people only do that, but there's a focus on it. But the primary focus is on formal, even with instructional designers, and they might say, okay, yes, you have to apply it afterwards, and maybe there's a job aid or something afterwards and things, and so the informal is coming into it, and we're moving in that direction. But that's moving out. It's often said, okay, well, that has to happen in the workplace. That has to happen by the managers, et cetera. That's where the application happens. But it's primarily focused on the formal learning. It's a focus on knowing, getting information and content, receiving that content, okay, and acquisition of that knowledge and content. In contrast, learning experience design, the paradigm is a little different. main focus is on experience, learning by doing, and I'm going to get into this a lot more as experience is a core of learning. And then it tends to be user-centric, focused on the user as opposed to the content. The content's important, but the user is central. It integrates formal, informal, and experiential learning, okay, with a more emphasis actually on the informal and experiential. There's a focus on doing as opposed to knowing. Okay, learning by doing through experience. That's what experience is about, doing. And the idea of construction of knowledge is that we don't just we're not just sponges, but we construct our knowledge. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So learning experience design sort of came out of some other parent disciplines, which I'm going to share with you. And so I'm going to give you a sense of that of the pieces that go into learning experience design. So first of all, it's based on learning science or cognitive science, understanding of how people learn. So that's a critical piece of this. And of course, I have a strong emphasis on that because that's my particular background. But making sure that what we design learning experiences are really based on the science of how people learn. And then another key piece of this is design thinking. And I'm going to go into each of these in a moment. But design thinking is a process for solving problems that's really focused on users first, and that, along with user experience design, UX design, these kind of, I think a lot of the idea of learning experience design came out of applying the principles from design thinking and user experience design to the learning process. Okay. The other parent discipline is content design and curation, coming up with the right content that people can use. That's a really important part of it. Critical piece is learning technology. Again, I'm going to talk more about each of these. The learning technology is what supports and enables a lot of the experience design. Okay. And then finally, data and analytics. It's knowing what you're getting, capturing that data, knowing and making sure that you're focused on the results and you can measure that you're getting the results. Okay. So those are some of the parent disciplines. And actually, this is a lot. And one thing I recognize is that to be a learning experience designer doesn't mean you have to be an expert in each of these things, but you do have to have a sense of these, understanding of them, and then be able to work with people who have expertise in these areas. And it's good to have to develop expertise in some aspects of these, a couple of these areas, and that can give you a good foundation. Actually, when I'm thinking about this, I think, this would be a great master's program for learning experience design. I'd love to have it one. If I could hire somebody who came from a master's who did this, I'd be really happy. Okay, and most of the master's programs don't quite get to this point. So anybody out there want to talk about doing that with me? Let me know, because it's I think we really need to move in this direction. And these are the pieces. Okay. Okay, let's get to the science part of it and the experience part of it. Okay. This little cycle here. We'll start down here, act, perceive, and adjust. This is the core of how learning happens. We do stuff, we perceive the results, we get the feedback from it, we take that in and we make some adjustments. And this is a core process in a lot of different places, and learning, not just for humans, for everybody. Okay, and I like to think of it as a fractal. A fractal is a pattern, simple pattern that repeats at levels of analysis. So this is true. This is how paramecium learn. Okay, so when you think about it, what happens with paramecium? If they're swimming around with their little cilia there, and if that's their acting, they're swimming around, right? They perceive something, and if they perceive it to be a good thing, like food, they adjust and start moving towards it so that they can eat it. If they perceive something that's bad, like a toxin, they start moving away from it. They make an adjustment. I mean, and basically they actually learn and go in a direction opposite of the area where they tend to find stuff that's bad, and to the area that they find things that are good to eat. So it's a core process that happens even at that level, and even at lower levels. Those whole idea of feedback loops is a key process that goes on at all levels of analysis throughout nature, and it's also part of our learning process. That's why I like to call it fractal, because it's a pattern that repeats at different levels of analysis. Okay, well, look at it this way. How about a kid learning? Okay, my daughter learned how to walk. She now is much older, and so she doesn't know how to walk anymore. She only knows how to run. But when she did learn how to walk, and this is not her, by the way, but it's someone who was like her at the time, how did she learn how to walk? Okay, What do you think? Did she take an e-learning course on how to walk? Hmm? Did she, I know, a board book. Did she have a board book? Here's how you walk, dear. No. What did she do? She sort of had a goal. She started trying stuff, picking up her legs, holding on to things. She would fall, okay, make mistakes. She'd get feedback on that from her environment, okay, and then she'd try again. She'd get some support, and basically she learned by doing, and then getting feedback and trying again and making mistakes and learning from those. She did this cycle of acting, perceiving her, how'd this go or not, and she got that feedback in various ways. What was the effect of moving my leg? I fell that way. I fell. I would see modeling of my parents, okay? I get coaching from my parents, I'd say, oh, good, no, very good. Some encouragement and showing how to do it here, put this foot here. Some support and scaffolding, walking, have them walk, and hold their hands is that encouragement. That's kind of the feedback. And this is how a baby learns to walk, okay? No classroom training, no e-learning. This is the natural way that we learn. Okay, the question, and it happens at all levels of analysis. How do we make this? How do we move this forward, even in a more complex environment that we have to learn? Okay, does that make sense? All right. So if this is the core of how we learn, by the way, that's experience, right? And acting is experience, perceiving it and adjusting based on that. Okay, but there's a little bit more to it than that for humans, but let's talk about that, and we'll get into a little crash course on cognitive science. Okay. Now, I'm looking at the time here. Okay, I'm going to give you, are you ready? Hold on to your seats. Holding on? Because I'm going to give you a 5-minute crash course on cognitive science. Ready? On your marks? Get set, go. Okay, so we know that we have the acting, that's the doing, right? And we perceive and we adjust. But what happens inside our heads? Let's talk about that really quickly. And this is kind of a model of information processing, not model from a lot of the cognitive science research. And this is a mental model of how we think and how we do. Okay, we act, we get that feedback, and we perceive it in various ways through our eyes or ears, whatever. Okay, then what happens inside? Okay. Well, first of all, what we perceive has to do with what we attend to, right? If you don't pay attention to something, you don't notice it. So attention is a key part of this process of perceiving that feedback, and that attentional process is core, okay? Making sure we're getting attention. And all these have instructional and learning experience design implications. You want somebody to learn something, they got to perceive the feedback. They got to be paying attention in the right way, and you got to set up conditions for that. What they're doing and how they adjust is comparing with what their goals are. What are my goals? What do I need to do? I need to complete this task. I need to walk. I want to do this. I want to do that. So it's all focused on the goals that people have. Okay. And those goals at a deeper level are often supported by motivations and emotions and feelings, because whether we like it or not, it's often our feelings and emotions. Oh, that's bad or that's good. Avoid or approach. Those are evolutionarily speaking, those are the key things that kind of drive us, our goals, and then and the motivations that then manifest in goals. I want to do this. I want to do that. Why do I want to do that? Because I want to make money. Because I want to be able to eat. Because I don't want to starve. Because I'm afraid of starving, or whatever. Or because I'm excited. Because this is an exciting thing that's really interesting, and I want to have purpose in my life, and that's my motivation. So all these things are guided by our goals. And then we have what's called working memory. A working memory is our consciousness. Okay, it's our stream of consciousness is the way to look at it, and so it's where you can only hold a couple of things and only do one thing at a time in your mind. That's your conscious thought process. And we can only think about one or two things at a time, consciously and actively. Okay, or hold stuff in the memory. Miller's, 7 plus or minus 2 items that you can hold in working memory. Okay, and short-term memory is also what it's called. But that is the place where processing happens. Okay. It's like the processing unit. So what happens is that's where your goals and your attention are combined to say, okay, I perceive this, here's my goal. What's the difference between them? Okay, I got to adjust. And then there's an adjustment made. And that happens in this conscious area called working memory. Okay. Now, working memory, when you process stuff, it can go into long-term memory, LTM, which includes mental models or schema. Okay, that's how our models and our perceptions of the world, our way of thinking about the world. Okay, and our long-term memory can be in different forms. Episodic is like the stories, experiences that we know, that we've had, stories we tell to ourselves, what happened. Okay, whereas declarative knowledge is the kind of the information we abstract from those experiences that we have as kind of statements and declarative principles, for example. And then there's procedurals, how do you do stuff? And these things can be automated and made automatic. Procedures like how do we drive a car, they're not, you don't need to use a conscious working memory. As you practice them, they become automated, okay? And then how do you get stuff into, from working memory into the, and tie it into the mental models and tie it into your learning? Because one way you can think of learning from a knowledge perspective is taking that new input and comparing it and connecting it in with your existing mental models. That process of doing that is reflection. So this is a key part of the learning process. And how are we going to set up ways for people to reflect on what the information they get? Okay, how do they reflect on the information they get so that they can then say, okay, all right, I got this, I'm going to put this into my memory. Okay, and this way it connects in here. Oh, now I understand it. What does it mean? Oh, I know I understand it. That means it fits into some mental model you already have. And that process of reflection, or, oh, wait, this doesn't fit in. Let me change something. I got to adjust how I'm thinking about this. That's all part of the reflection process. And so we need to support that process as well, okay? And then part of what happens in the automatic aspects of is what's called pattern matching. And this has to do with expertise too. So when I look at a situation, I automatically pattern match, say, oh, there's a challenge here. Oh, there's an issue here. And that's what an expert does. An expert radiologist can look at a X-ray and pattern match to the right pattern in their mind and say, oh, okay, this is the situation. This means that this person's got this kind of ailment. Okay, that's what an expert can do. Or we all do that pattern matching. Here's a situation, boom, and it happens automatically. It has to happen automatically and through habits, for example, which are automatic, because there's not enough room in working memory to do all this stuff consciously. Okay, so it all happens kind of offline, behind the scenes. Finally, one thing that we see, and it's become clear in a lot of areas, it has to do with change too, is that we have kind of this thing that some people call it knowledge shield. Our mental models, we try to conserve them. We try to not change them. We don't want to change them. We try to make sure that we only change them when we have to. Okay, and that's good because we want to, we don't want our minds to be jumping all over the place and changing all the time. But it also can be a problem when it makes it hard to change when evidence builds up that things are wrong. Look at political examples, for example, where you have people who are so set in their mental models of the world set in left or right or whatever, and it's really hard. All the evidence they take, they match into their own perspective and they don't want to change it. And those of us who want to do change management, this is one of the things we have to overcome, is help people get that, okay? And the last piece of it in the crash course is metacognition. And I have to say, I've never metacognition I didn't like. Sorry, I do like bad puns too. Okay, so metacognition is thinking about thinking. This is kind of our own process of saying, oh, if I do this, oh, maybe I should really focus over here. It's our thinking about and directing our own thought processes. And that's an important piece too, helping people structure and think about what's a good learning strategy for myself, a plan to do this. Okay, crash course over. Okay, are you overwhelmed? This is a core. And the reason I like to do this, and of course there's a lot more to it, and by the way, I'll have resources and a lot more information on all this, so email me and I can send you much more details on all these things, articles that have been written and resources to look further into this stuff. But the reason it's important to me is that when we're doing learning experience design, thinking about these aspects of what happens when we learn helps me in designing. Okay, how do I make sure people are getting good feedback by doing? How am I making sure they're attending to the right things and not the wrong things? How am I supporting the working memory and maybe limiting the cognitive load that they have? How am I enabling them and setting up reflection opportunities so that they can take what they've perceived and then get it into their learning, their mental models? How do we help tie into their goals and their motivations? All these things that are, this mental model helps me think about how I'm designing learning. And it's an important piece of that is to say, okay, yeah, this is how people learn. Okay, what do I need to do to support that process? Okay. So what's the upshot of this? The upshot is that what happens in our minds is we actively construct our knowledge and skills through experience. Through those experiences, we build these mental models and our knowledge and our skills and our procedures that's in the long-term memory and our ability to do those things. They're not just like, we're not sponges that just like our tape recorders. We actually construct them, and you only can construct something like this through active engagement. So one thing way you can think of what a learning experience designer does is we support and accelerate people's construction of knowledge and skills. Okay, deep breath. Okay, are there any questions that's come up?
Yeah, there's a couple questions here. But you know, these are spanning the last several minutes, so not necessarily with what's here on the screen.
Yeah, that's fine.
Are learning experience design controlled learning just like instructional design?
Good question. I would say that the degree of structure and control for learning experience design needs to be based on the degree of prior experience of the learner, the level of expertise. The more of a novice they are in a particular domain, the more structure you want to provide and scaffolding, they call it. And then over time, as they get more and more capable of and knowledgeable in the field, they know more, you just need to provide the resources. So how much structure you give and how directive you are needs to shift based on the level of expertise of the learner. And that's the simple answer, how I think about that stuff.
If we are using the learning design experience process, can we still deliver instructional design courses?
Yes, courses can have be part of that process. You know, that 70-20-10, that's the 10%, and they have a place for. There's a place for getting, you know, some of the basics and things, and for more structured things. However, in a moment, I'm going to share with you. There's a certain way that I think these types of courses should be designed that is different than many of us do at this point. So I'm going to go into what that means in a moment. Okay.
Another comment here is this person works in the healthcare industry and agrees that we need more experiential learning. But like in a hospital, failure isn't always an option, especially when training. And simulations are one possible option. Are there other ideas or suggestions you have for training in that kind of a situation?
Yes. You can do simulations are a good way to do it, and I've done a lot in the healthcare area, helping in a variety of different areas in healthcare, and that's true. You can't, you know, make mistakes on patients. But yes, simulations are a good way to do it, and it can be live. It could be online simulations. We've done stuff where there's simulations where we have actors playing the roles of patients, and then there's pieces along the line. And actually, I can share with you, whoever asked that, if you email me, I could share with you a whole process that we use for learning in healthcare that included a series of things, including e-learning, and then online simulations, and then actual live simulations, as well as informational types of things. So there's a way to structure it, move people to that piece. And then also, even with the real patients, that's when you have preceptorships, and you can have mentoring coaching where someone's doing stuff with a little patient, but there's someone right there standing there and helping them to making sure that it doesn't go wrong and coaching them. So there are many ways to make that work. Glad to share more, Pat. But I want to move on to one of the other core elements, and I'm not going to go a lot into this, but this is a really key piece, though. It's design thinking. Okay, so if we're going to design learning experience design is a key part of this. And one of the main methods of design, ways of thinking about design these days, that's been applied to product design and to organization design and many areas, is design thinking. And how many? Let's do a show of hands. How many of you are familiar? Question one is, how many of you have even heard of design thinking? Just raise your hand real quick. And Andrew, give me a sense of how many, about?
Sure, they're still coming in. It looks like about 30%.
Okay. How many? Okay, new question. How many of you have actually applied or used design thinking principles in learning or other ways?
Those are still coming in, but it's looked like it slowed down around 20%.
Okay. Okay, great. So some people are familiar with it. And design thinking is a methodology for solving problems, it says here, a formal method for a practical, creative resolution of problems and creation of solutions. I'd say the core thing about design thinking is, one, empathizing, this idea of really understanding the needs of the user, okay, who they are at a deep level, and then very clearly defining the problem. What is going on? What do we need here in a very deep way? Not just, oh, they need to learn something. Oh, but why do they need to learn? What's the context of that? What are the issues related to that? Defining that, because the more, and some say that, you know, 90% of the solution is defining the problem. Okay, and then coming up with creative solutions, saying let's brainstorm and come up with a whole bunch of ideas, and then rapidly test them and try them out, okay, as hypotheses of what and to come up with a solution. So it's an iterative process, and this process has been very effective. It started in IDEO, the company that did a lot of the Apple design stuff, has been a big user proponent of it, as well as Stanford has they have a design school that focuses on this. And again, I'll send up resources if you want to learn more. I'm going to focus on a couple of pieces right here that are important in a moment. The other element, though, is this idea of user experience design, UX design. That's often thought of as designing websites or designing software and that type of thing. But it's the process of enhancing user satisfaction by improving the usability, accessibility, and pleasure provided by the interaction between the user and the product. Well, this same process can be applied to learning products, okay? And how do you design it in a way that really works for the user? Think about all the UX design that's gone to the apps that we use on our phone, and then compare that to the interface of our LMSs or of some of our e-learning, or some of our other tools that we have to use in the workplace. We got to start applying the best of the UX, user experience design, in applying our learning experiences as well. And so UX experience, user is one of the origins of the learning experience perspective and a core piece of it. Okay, she sums it up. Aretha Franklin. Actually, when I do this, I do some day-long workshops on this type of thing, and I always play it. I'm not going to play the music now, but I play her song R-E-S-P-C-T. Here I am singing to all of you. Find out what it means to me. This should be the main song that defines how our learning design process. Respect for the learner. Okay, and so play the song yourself. You can get it with the lyrics on YouTube, and then just substitute the words when she says home, substitute work, substitute when she says time, substitute money, and instead of kisses, because this is a workplace type thing, right? We'll substitute handshake. Okay, and if you play that song, you'll see this should be the anthem for learning experience design. Okay, respect. Well, think about it. Be respectful and really understand what the needs are of our learners in our organization. If we can really do that, that takes us 90% of the way there. Okay. Anyway, let's talk about that empathizing, that respect piece of it. So one of the things that's done in design thinking is to really understand, and user experience design, is really understand the persona of the learner and empathize. So you think of a prototypical learner, and you might have multiple categories of learners, and you take those, and you look at what are their goals, what their desires, their emotions. Remember from that cognitive science piece that I showed you, right? What are the challenges and frustrations and fears? Not just like their work goals, but also the underlying goals, because those are the things that really motivate people. What's driving someone? What is their level of experience, okay, and their level of expertise? Remember, you asked that question about how much structure? Well, part of it has to do with where they are, okay, on their level, their process of learning a particular skill set. What are their motivations, intrinsic and extrinsic? And then so what might he or she, and what might we, or what might he? That's a design thinking phrase. Like, think about what might he be thinking, what might he or she be feeling. Okay, what might be saying, so that when they encounter this learning. And so a process like this, and there's some tools for getting at this more deeply, going through this process, it takes some time, I know, but by doing it really makes sense, sure that your learning is going to be effective. Because I don't know about you, but I have to say it, I've designed what I thought was the greatest e-learning courses and things. I've done many of them. And then to find that people didn't really use them. They were really good, but people didn't want to use them, even though they were really cool, because the context wasn't there, or because it didn't meet their real motivation. They had other incentives, things like that. And so if we can get ourselves to really get into that, what the real needs of the user are, empathize, we're much more likely to design something that they'll actually use. And if we invest a ton of money on a great thing that nobody uses, we just wasted a lot of money for our organizations. Okay, so you remember this kind of 70-20-10 thing I was talking about? So the other thing is we want to talk about is the experiences and sequencing of experiences too. So let's say what happens is generally now is in most organizations, we do the formal training, and then they go off into the workplace. And whether we like it or not, Steve Rosenbaum, who's a guy who wrote a book called Learning Paths, calls this area the mystery period. The mystery period. This is the time where we don't know what happens. We sent them off from our training, and hopefully they're going to learn this stuff. And really, a lot of the learning happens on the job. They're going to try stuff. They're going to have friends tell them, or colleagues or bosses saying, "Oh, no, this is how you really do it," or "Oh, wait, how do I do this?" That kind of thing. So this is where a lot of the learning happens. The problem is that learning happens in a very haphazard way generally. Okay, and so the question is, how do we straighten out? Because it's like, you may not get all the right experiences you need. Okay, and why do they say? Remember, the term it takes 10 years or 10,000 hours to become an expert. Malcolm Gladwell and others have talked about that. Researchers and expertise. Well, why does it take so long? Well, I'd say that it's not about time, actually. It's about experiences. How long does it take to get the right set of experiences that will enable you to develop and construct your knowledge and understanding and pattern matching to be able to handle all the situations an expert can handle? Okay, that's what it's about. So if you, in real life, it's very, very haphazard, right? That's why informal learning, just learning on the job is okay, but it takes a long time. Okay, because you don't get all the experiences in a systematic way. But what if we could take those experiences in the learning experience design process and in a very systematic way set up a set of experiences, both formal but informal and on the job through simulations, but also on the job assignments that kind of make sure that people get the right experiences, okay, in a systematic way. Then you can really reduce that time to proficiency. That represents huge savings for the organization, right? If you can reduce the time it takes for a salesperson to get up to quota, that's a huge amount of money. If you can reduce the time by 40, 50%, someone to be ready to do a job and reduce the error rate by that much, that's a huge savings. How do you do that? Well, one thing is to define with an expert. One of the things we do is work with experts and say, okay, what are the experiences and knowledge that an expert in the field does? And so what we do is we work with them. This is an example of some that I worked with that say, hey, what do you do and what kind of situations you handle? And they say, oh, it's an infinite number of situations. They say, okay, that's fine. Write them all down on cards, and then we're going to organize and categorize. And then it turns out it becomes you can turn them to a finite set of experiences, and then from that you can build the set of experiences that you want to have in your learning path most effectively. So for example, so what you're going to do is you say, what are the situations you handle? Okay, list them all. Categorize them, okay, organize them into categories, and usually it's a relatively small number of categories even that you can do that. And they vary by different parameters, okay? So each one it varies so that, yes, you can have only 5 categories, but each one varies by a bunch of things. And based on that, you can create a matrix, what we call a taxonomy of situations. And that taxonomy, that matrix, can then be a guide. Okay, now we need to make sure to optimize that path to proficiency. The experiences someone needs, okay, are these types of experiences, and let's make sure they can get those kind of experiences. And here's the prototypical ones, okay. And then what is the knowledge that they need to support doing those things? That's a content, okay. What are the strategies and heuristics that they use? So we get from the experts that implicit knowledge as well, and that supports the experiences. So we have a whole process. I know, again, this is a lot of stuff. I have information on all this, and we do a whole workshop. I do workshops on design thinking and applying it to your organization. I also do workshops on this, what we call knowledge harvesting, getting that content from experts in a way that can enable us to set up the learning paths most effectively. So, but this is an example of how that's done. And then here's the thing I want to say. This is really important. So you've heard the expression content is king. Okay, content is king. But if content is king, then experience is the emperor. It's about experience. Content supports and is subservient to the experience. Not the other way around. Most of us focus on content. Most of the tools out there that you see focus on content. As a matter of fact, a lot of the tools out there now more recently started being called learning experience platforms. If you heard of that term, learning experience platforms. But if you look at them, like Degree, they're all good tools. They're good tools, but they're not. I don't think that they're really learning experience platforms. They are content curation platforms, which is different than learning experience platforms. Anyway, that's my pet peeve. But the point is, it's all about experience, and content's important, but it's in support of experience. Okay. So what about content? It's very important. You know, how do you get on-demand content? How do you set up experiences and give people that content that they need at the teachable moment? That's the way to use content. Set up experiences and give them the information they need, whether it's knowledge base or video clips or micro-learning, mini tutorials, or just asking someone, oh, how do you do this? But it's at that moment, that teachable moment, that's most important, because if you can do it then, at that teachable moment, people, when they're about to try to do something, okay, one, they're motivated to get the information because they need it. Two, they are going to remember it and more likely because they're about to use it. And to use a technical cognitive term, if you use it, you don't lose it. And third, if you provide that content at a teachable moment, you're getting that content in the context of how it's used to do a real thing and solve a problem. So we're making a mental link directly between that information, that content, and how it's used. And that is one of the biggest differences between experts and novices. Now, novices have their information organized by the textbook in a nice outline. Experts take those 10 years of experience and reorganize their knowledge to do that pattern matching of saying, oh, here's the situation, and here's the content information I need to bring to bear to it. And so it takes that time to make those links. That's how people use the content, right? And so if we can teach people the content in the context of the experience, it's often called situated learning, situated in the context, then we make mental links between that information in the context and how it's used, and we're more likely to, next time we come across something like that, be able to bring up the right information to be able to use it and do it again. Very simple, teachable moment. Okay, so what does that mean for training? Someone asked about e-learning. Okay, so you know what this is, right? Upside down cake, pineapple, okay? Well, think about its training as an upside down training cake. Instructional design, its typical paradigm is you break things down into meaningful chunks, you sequence it, you add it, you give the information, you add in some interactions, then you have people apply it, right? That's a typical instructional design process. Okay. What we want to do for learning experience design is turn it upside down. Start with the scenario, the experience, something to do that you need to do. Start with those, the scenarios and the challenges, and then you provide the content as they need it in the teachable moment. Okay, just that flip makes learning, online learning, much more engaging, interesting, or any kind of learning. So I'll give you some examples now. I've been talking about stuff, but I'll give you a couple examples. So here's one, for example. This is for learning some complex stuff. This is for Social Security Administration. It was done many years ago. And they had to do, these people who work in the field offices have to learn a lot of complex stuff in terms of policies and procedures. And here's something of they had to learn how to handle these kinds of situations, okay? And so we have set up a scenario. Okay, we did not give them a big tutorial on this yet, right? But we give them, it's on living arrangements. They told this customer rep, he's living with his sister, he doesn't contribute to the household. What living arrangement code applies? Well, I don't know, okay. Well, that sets up a teachable moment. So now if I click on the reference guide, okay, there is a nice performance support tool or knowledge base that goes over the stuff. So here's the stuff that if I would just present it, it would be really boring and no one would ever remember it. But now I'm going to it for a purpose. I got to figure, okay, now which applies to this particular situation? Then I go back, right? And I go back and I can, and here's the question that I was trying to get it to. So I have that in context and say, okay, now I'm looking it up. So I'm actively looking it up and I'm going to apply it. So basically what I like to say is that learning or e-learning, okay, people don't like when I say this, especially because I work for e-learning brothers, but e-learning should not have any content in it. It should have scenarios, challenges, problems to solve, and then you link to the content. It could be within the program, but also can be better even to a knowledge base or a reference tool outside of that people are going to use every day, and link to that at the teachable moment. Think about that, flipping your learning around. And that applies in classroom training too. This was a client that was, there were a set of distributors of electronic components, and those guys on the right there, they're brilliant product managers, experts. They used to do PowerPoint presentations to these people. This one, we did this throughout Asia. This is actually in Japan. And they would present to PowerPoint. Basically, it's called death by PowerPoint. Okay, people would like fall asleep, the sales reps, it didn't work. So we turned it all around. We worked with them, come up with the scenarios as the experts. How are these things applied? They wanted to be consultative in terms of applying with customers, and then they turned it around, and there was, and so basically what they're doing is they're working through problems, customer situation problems. Those manuals, okay, on our laptops is where they have all the content and all their catalog of thousands of items, and they have to figure out, here's a set of electronic plans, what products fit within those. And then the coaches are there to give them feedback at the teachable moment. Okay, it turns it around, flips it around to project-based learning within the classroom in a very structured way. One more example of this is the on-the-job component. And so we built a few years ago in order to enable this type of thing, this learning paths, learning experiences included on-the-job learning. We built something called the Trek Learning Experience Manager, which now in the past year, my company has become part of the e-Learning Brothers, and now we provide this through e-Learning Brothers. If you're interested, we're happy to share more information about it. But basically, the reason why I want to show it now is that it's an example of a way to make this happen in the on-the-job learning process. Okay, so basically, it manages and tracks those learning paths that include the formal and informal learning. It sets up that coaching cycle. Okay, and it automates the tracking so that it complies to on-the-job learning as well. And basically, we built it because I was espousing this type of thing and setting up this curriculum, and there was no technology to help it. So we built this technology to do it, and you're free to use it too. So here we go. So just a quick example of this. So for example, he's learning on the job. He got some information on it's for water softening, installing water softening equipment. Okay, so he's got to go and install and conduct a water test the water. So here, this is on his mobile phone as part of his learning path. Okay, before I'm going to do that, I'm going to look up how to do it. Okay, and then I'm going to do it. So right there at the teachable moment, I'm out in the field. I'm going to look up how to do the water test, and then I'm going to do it. So I look it up, and on my mobile phone, I have a knowledge base that's separate from the Trek, but that enables them to go exactly to what they need, conducting a water test. Or if I need more help on it, I can go look at a video on how to do it just in time. So that's where you make micro-learning. When micro-learning is right moment, it's most valuable. Now I got this, and I'm going to apply it. So that's an example. Here's the cognitive science. And in some ways, if you take apprenticeship learning, which is learning by doing and getting feedback, but it's not scalable. If you take technology and you apply it to cognitive pieces, you get what's called cognitive apprenticeship, which is developed when I was in grad school by Alan Collins and John Seeley Brown. It took the best of apprenticeship and best of cognitive learning, and then we add technology to that. That enables us to really to create learning experiences and design learning experiences that really get results. And then the last thing I want to do is kind of see how it all fits together. So remember, that's that cycle. I was just using some different terms. You do, reflect, plan, okay? And so this is where, and this is that thing I showed you at the beginning when I first presented this. I was thinking, yeah, what I do is I design these experiences, because all learning is a set of these experiences and these cycles to get to proficiency. And then we support that. How do we support that? Well, we make sure we tie into their motivation and goals. This is a summary basically of all the stuff we've talked about. They have to do something. They act with job. It could be the task. It could be a simulation. It could be scenarios. We support that with modeling, examples, performance support, scaffolding, giving them a lot of support at the beginning, and then taking that support away as they need it. Guidance at the teachable moment. The reflection process is really important, because that's how we get what we perceive into our long-term memory. So, we want to perceive that feedback, right? And then we support that. Coaching, having a conversation with someone is a great way to reflect. Sharing with someone is a great way to reflect. Having a community of practice to talk to, peers, writing down something in a portfolio, talking about it. Those are all ways to reflect. We need to be more, we're really bad at getting people to reflect in a structured, focused way. And that's a really important part of the process. We need to do more. And then finally, the planning. Well, what am I going to do next? What's my next learning goal? Okay. And then how are we going to support that? And this support for before doing the next thing, that's where the formal learning comes in. That's just one piece of the pie. And yes, have a quick mini tutorial, or or maybe just ask someone or provide some content. And yes, maybe you can have an e-learning course, but that kind of gives you the setup to be able to go and do stuff. And it should be as close to when you're going to do it as possible. Okay, so this is a way that kind of this all can fit together. And lastly, this all fits into a kind of a learning ecosystem. Okay, so these all fits together in a learning ecosystem. And I'm really gotten into the idea of this evolutionary biological model. Dave Kelly from the e-Learning Guild defines it, and we do consulting on how to. That's the other thing we do workshops on, is how do you put together a learning ecosystem with the right technologies and people taking this into account, because that's where we need to go. Okay, and so that ecosystem can include people, content, measurement, processes, technology, all of these pieces. And how do you put them together in a systematic way that work for your organization and move things forward? That's the big challenge. Okay, now I have a question for you. Poll question, please, Andrew. Which is most accurate for you right now? Now that you've went through this whole bunch of stuff. I consider myself an instructional designer. I consider myself a learning experience designer, irrespective of your title. I plan on becoming a learning experience designer. Or now I'm really confused. Or if you have others, put them in the question area.
These responses are still coming in. There's definitely a clear leader amongst our audience. give you guys just a couple more moments to vote. Last one's a 3, 2, 1. Okay, here's those results. So 51% of our audience plans on becoming learning experience designers. 36% currently consider themselves learning experience designers. 7% consider themselves instructional designers. And there's still 6% that are really confused.
Okay, and that's a good proportion. And by the way, all the confused ones, I'm happy to follow up with you, but anybody else too, happy to follow up. By the way, so yeah, a couple of things. So I have a list of resources on all this stuff. I know it's a lot, and there's a lot. Each of these can be expanded. So email me if you want some of that. Also, this is the link. I put it in there also to that conversation. Really cool if we can all. I'd love to continue the conversation there. So I started this conversation, and please feel free to go on LinkedIn and contribute to it as well. Okay, and lastly, Andrew, you want to talk about this a bit?
I do. I want to talk about this so bad. So ELBX Live is in 20 days, Salt Lake City at the University of Utah. Marty, are you going to be there? Dr.
I'm going to be there. I'm actually going to be doing more in depth on learning experience design.
This is going to be great. You're probably going to be doing a session. If you guys want to come and meet with Dr. Rosenheck and learn about more about learning experience design, chat with him at ELBX Live. So that's coming up 20 days, June 10th. You can register or just learn more about it at elearningbrothers.com. There's also a section at elearningbrothers.com that talks about the 2018 ELBX Live, and that was really, really cool if you want to see kind of what to expect here at this year's conference. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenheck. This has been great. There were quite a few questions that we weren't able to get to. I will get these over to Dr. Rosenheck, and we'll try to get as many of these answered for you guys when we do the blog recap later in the week. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Dr. Rosenheck. We'll see you guys later.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.